London, 1888. The greatest city on earth, and one of the most brutal. The British Empire ruled over a quarter of the world's surface. Queen Victoria sat on the throne. Gas lamps lit the grand streets of Westminster and Mayfair, where wealthy men, in top hats, walked to their clubs, and carriages rattled past elegant townhouses. London was powerful. London was magnificent. And London, if you knew where to look, was absolutely rotten to the core. 15 miles from Buckingham Palace in the East End district of Whitechapel, another city existed. One that the newspapers called a den of vice, a hotbed of sin, a place where decent people did not go. They were wrong about the vice, but they were right about the suffering. Whitechapel, in 1888, was a nightmare of overcrowding, poverty, and disease. 80,000 people were packed into crumbling tenements and shared lodging houses, living on pennies a day, sleeping 10 to a room, dying of cholera, tuberculosis, and sheer exhaustion. The streets smelled of sewage and rotting food. Children begged on corners. Men stood in bread lines. And women, particularly women, had almost no way out. The women who lived and worked in Whitechapel's lodging houses paid 4 pence a night for a bed. If you didn't have 4 pence, you slept on the street. And if you slept on the street, you were in danger. The solution, for many women, was to sell the only thing they had left: themselves. Prostitution was everywhere in Whitechapel. Not glamorous, not romantic, desperate. Women in their 40s and 50s, sick, hungry, often drunk, working in dark alleyways for the price of a bed. This is the world into which Jack the Ripper stepped, and the world that made him possible. The first sign that something was wrong came on the morning of April 3rd, 1888, when a woman named Emma Smith was found staggering through the streets with horrific injuries. She had been attacked by a gang of men in Osborne Street and robbed. She made it to hospital but died the next day. The police noted it. Whitechapel was violent. Women died there. It happened. 4 months later, on the 7th of August, the body of Martha Tabram was found on a staircase in George Yard Buildings. She had been stabbed 39 times. 39. The ferocity of the attack was unlike anything investigators had seen. Still, no one connected the two incidents. No one was looking for a pattern. No one was looking for one man. That was about to change. At 3:40 in the morning on the 31st of August, 1888, a carman named Charles Cross was walking to work through Bucks Row, a dark, narrow street in Whitechapel. He spotted what he thought was a pile of tarpaulin lying in the gutter. He went closer. It was a woman. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols. She was 43 years old. She had 5 children she hadn't seen in years, a husband who had left her, and a drinking problem that had brought her to Whitechapel. That night, she had been turned away from her lodging house because she didn't have the 4 pence needed for a bed. She had been seen earlier, drunk, but cheerful, telling a friend she would earn her DOS money soon enough. She never did. Her throat had been cut twice. The second cut went so deep it nearly severed her head from her body. She had been killed in less than a minute, in a street where people lived, where windows overlooked the pavement and where no one heard a thing. 8 days later, on the 8th of September, Annie Chapman was found dead in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. She was 47. She too had been turned away from her lodgings for lack of money. She too had gone out into the dark streets to earn it. A witness had seen her speaking with a man at around 5:30 in the morning, less than 30 minutes before her body was discovered. The man was described as dark, wearing a deerstalker hat and appearing foreign. he was never found. This time the killer had gone further. Annie Chapman's body had been mutilated. Internal organs had been removed with what the examining surgeon described as considerable anatomical knowledge. The police surgeon, George Bagster Phillips, was so disturbed by what he saw that he refused to describe Annie Chapman's injuries in open court, saying that the details were unfit for public hearing. Now London was paying attention. The newspapers exploded. Reporters descended on Whitechapel. Theories multiplied. A local shoemaker named John Pizer, known as Leather Apron, was arrested as a suspect and then released for lack of evidence. The police were overwhelmed. Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline was brought in from Scotland Yard to lead the investigation. 2,000 people were interviewed. 300 suspects were investigated. 80 were detained. And the killer walked free through all of it. On the night of the 29th of September, 1888, something was waiting to happen in Whitechapel. The streets were thick with fog. The gas lamps cast pools of yellow light on wet cobblestones, and somewhere in those shadows, the Ripper was already moving. At 1 o'clock in the morning on the 30th of September, a man named Louis Diemschutz drove his horse and cart into Dutfield's yard, off Berner Street. His horse shied away from something on the ground. Diemschutz climbed down and found the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat had been cut. The rest of her body was largely untouched, which led investigators to believe that Diemschutz had interrupted the killer mid-act, forcing him to flee before he could continue. If that was true, then what followed was an act of extraordinary cold nerve. 45 minutes later, less than a mile away in Mitre Square, PC Edward Watkins was doing his regular patrol. He had checked the square 14 minutes earlier and found nothing. Now, in the corner of the square, he found Catherine Eddowes. She was 46 years old. She had actually been released from police custody earlier that evening, having been arrested for being drunk and disorderly. She had given a false name. The police let her go at 1 in the morning, directly into the streets where a killer was hunting. The Ripper had done to Catherine Eddowes what he had been prevented from doing to Elizabeth Stride. The mutilations were extensive. Her left kidney had been removed. Part of her earlobe had been cut away. That detail mattered more than anyone realized at the time. 3 days before the double murder, the Central News Agency had received a letter. It was written in red ink, in a confident, mocking hand, and it was signed, Jack the Ripper. That was the first time those words had ever appeared. The letter taunted the police, bragged about the killings, and made a specific threat. In the next job, the writer said, he would clip the lady's ears off. No one took it seriously. The police assumed it was a hoax from a journalist trying to sell newspapers. Then Catherine Eddowes was found, with her earlobe cut. Suddenly the letter didn't look like a hoax anymore. Within days, a postcard arrived. The Saucy Jackie card, written in what appeared to be the same hand. It referenced the double event. It laughed at the police. The authorities published facsimiles of both the letter and the postcard on posters throughout London, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting. No one came forward. Then came the letter that made Scotland Yard go cold. On the 16th of October, 1888, a man named George Lusk received a small cardboard box in the post. Lusk was the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of local businessmen who had organized civilian patrols to try to catch the killer. Inside the box was half a human kidney, and there was a letter. The letter began, "From hell." The writer claimed to have taken the kidney from one of the victims, to have fried and eaten the other half, and to offer the remaining piece as a gift. The spelling was erratic and strange. The tone was something beyond arrogance. It was something closer to pleasure. A medical examination determined the kidney was human, female, and consistent with the age of Catherine Eddowes. Whether it actually came from her body has been debated ever since. But the letter from hell has never been satisfactorily explained as a hoax. Its authorship remains unknown. By November 1888, London was in a state of panic, unlike anything in living memory. Vigilante patrols walked the streets of Whitechapel every night. Women refused to go out alone. The police commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, resigned under pressure from a furious public. Theories about the Ripper's identity circulated in every pub, every newspaper, every drawing room in Britain. And then, on the 9th of November, 1888, it ended. Or at least, it appeared to. Mary Jane Kelly, was the youngest of the Ripper's victims. She was 25 years old, the only one who had her own room, at 13 Miller's Court, off Dorset Street. She had been heard singing earlier that evening. A neighbor heard something in the night, a single cry, "Oh, murder," and thought nothing of it. In Whitechapel, people cried out in the night. You learned not to listen. At 10:45 the following morning, the landlord's assistant came to collect the rent. Mary Kelly was weeks behind. He knocked on the door. No answer. He reached through a broken window, pushed aside a coat being used as a curtain, and looked inside. What he saw in that room has never been described in full in polite company, and will not be described in full here. Mary Jane Kelly had been mutilated beyond recognition. Her partner, Joseph Barnett, was only able to identify her by her eyes and her ears. The Ripper had spent hours in that room, something he had never had before. Time. And he had used every minute of it. After Mary Kelly, the murders stopped. No further victim was ever conclusively linked to Jack the Ripper. The killing simply ceased. And that silence has haunted criminologists and historians ever since, because it raises the question that has never been answered. What happened to him? The most common theories are these. He died, possibly by suicide, possibly by illness. He was institutionalized, locked away in an asylum, never identified as the Ripper. He emigrated, took himself to another country and was never seen again. Or he simply stopped. For reasons no one will ever understand. The police closed their active investigation quietly in the early 1890s. The files were sealed. The names of the suspects were written in internal memoranda and argued over for decades. And the world moved on. Except that it didn't. Not really. Jack the Ripper never left. More than 100 years have passed since the Autumn of Terror in Whitechapel. In that time, over 100 suspects have been seriously proposed. Books have been written, documentaries produced, conferences held, and evidence analyzed with modern forensic tools that the Victorians couldn't have imagined. And still, no one knows. But there are suspects who stand above the rest. Let us look at the most credible ones. The first is Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish immigrant who lived in Whitechapel at the time of the murders. He was known to be deeply mentally ill, to have an intense hatred of women, particularly women who worked as prostitutes, and he had a history of threatening behavior with a knife. He was committed to an asylum in February 1891, which would explain the sudden end to the killings. A police official named Melville McNagden, in a private memorandum written in 1894, named Kosminski as one of 3 main suspects and described him as being the most likely culprit. A DNA study conducted in 2014 claimed to have matched genetic material from a shawl found at the Catherine et al.'s crime scene to Kosminski's descendants. The study was controversial, disputed by other scientists, and has never been conclusively confirmed. The second major suspect is Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher who drowned himself in the Thames in December 1888, just weeks after the final murder. His body was found floating in the river on the 31st of December. He left no note. He had recently lost his teaching position under mysterious circumstances. McNagnon also named him as a suspect, writing that Druitt was sexually insane and that his family believed him to have been the Ripper. The evidence against Druitt is largely circumstantial, but the timing of his death has never stopped being noticed. The third is Michael Ostrog, a Russian career criminal and self-described physician who had been committed to lunatic asylums on multiple occasions. McNaughton named him too, citing his homicidal tendencies. However, Ostrog's whereabouts during the murders have never been conclusively confirmed as placing him in Whitechapel, and many modern researchers consider him the weakest of the 3 main suspects. Beyond these 3, theories have multiplied wildly over the decades. Walter Sickert, the painter, was accused, largely on the basis of bizarre theories later proven to rest on fabricated evidence. The royal family's physician, Sir William Gull, was named in a conspiracy theory that suggested the murders were carried out to protect a royal secret. This theory has been thoroughly discredited by historians, but continues to circulate. An Irish-American quack doctor named Francis Tumblety was a serious suspect at the time. He was actually arrested in London in November 1888 on charges of gross indecency and fled to America before trial. Some researchers believe he was the most serious suspect Scotland Yard ever identified. None of them have ever been proven. Each theory falls apart somewhere. The evidence is too fragmented, too degraded, too old. The Victorian police, though thorough by the standards of their time, had no fingerprinting, no DNA analysis, no forensic photography of the crime scenes as they were found. They were fighting a modern monster with medieval tools. And the monster won. Jack the Ripper has been dead for well over a century. The streets of Whitechapel have been rebuilt. The lodging houses are gone. The gas lamps have been replaced by electric lights. The fog, the real Victorian fog, thick with coal smoke and river damp, no longer rolls through those luthers, sir. And yet, every year, hundreds of thousands of people walk the streets of East London on Ripper tours, following the route of the murders, standing in the places where 5 women died, staring at the buildings that replaced the ones where the killer walked. The Jack the Ripper Museum in Cable Street draws visitors from around the world. Dozens of new books are published every decade. The case is discussed in university criminology courses. It has been the subject of films, television series, video games, operas, and graphic novels. Why? Why does a Victorian serial killer, one of hundreds who have since been caught, convicted, and identified, retain such a grip on the human imagination? Part of it is the name, Jack the Ripper. It was almost certainly invented by a journalist, signed onto a letter that was probably a hoax, and spread by newspapers that understood that nothing sells papers like fear. The name is theatrical, memorable. It sounds like something from a penny dreadful. It sounds somehow exactly like what a monster should be called. part of it is the mystery. In an age when DNA has solved cold cases decades old, when security cameras film every street corner, when digital records make it almost impossible to disappear, the fact that a killer in 1888 committed 5 brutal murders in a densely populated city, with witnesses nearby, in the middle of an active police investigation, and was never caught, never identified, never explained. That is something the human mind cannot let go. And part of it is what the case revealed about the world in which those women lived. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly were not random victims of a random monster. They were women who had been failed by poverty, by addiction, by a society that offered them no safety net and no protection. They slept in lodging houses that cost 4 pence a night. They went out into the dark streets to earn that 4 pence. And no one noticed them. No one cared about them until a killer made them famous. The newspapers of 1888 didn't write about them as human beings. They wrote about them as victims, as evidence, as props in the drama of a monster they were making into a celebrity. Their names appeared in headlines, but their lives, their children, their marriages, their histories, their laughter, those were ignored. We know their names now. We say them. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. They deserve to be remembered as women, not just as victims of a man no one ever caught. Jack the Ripper was never identified. He was never arrested. He was never brought to justice. He left behind 5 dead women, a city paralyzed by fear, and a mystery that has lasted 130 years and shows no sign of ending. Somewhere in the records of Victorian London, in the police files, the census returns, the hospital records, the asylum registers, his real name is almost certainly written down. We just don't know which one it is. And perhaps in the end, that is exactly why he never stopped haunting us. Because monsters with names can be understood. Monsters without names cannot. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more history and mystery content.